Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar, Web 3.0, Evolving into a New World. It is a pleasure to host the webinar, the second episode of the Future series, a series of virtual discussions focused on exploring the possibilities, challenges, and pitfalls of the latest technologies, trends, and developments, and it is organized by the Center for Artificial Intelligence and Robotics of UNICRI, United Nations. My name is Irakli Beridze. I'm head of this center. Today, we'll be discussing Web 3.0 and how, if and when, we are evolving into a new world. It is extremely important to have understanding of it from the real experts for the United Nations, as we are building bridges for the communities. We are building understanding of the communities from the tech providers, from the people who are developing technology, people who are investing in the technology, through the academics, for the government, and to the international organizations as well. We at the Center for AI and Robotics of UNICRI, United Nations, are extremely interested in how technology is going to affect our world positively and to prepare for the negative consequences of it as well. The newly coined term Web 3.0 has become a popular topic to speak about for societies at large. Web 3.0 represents the next phase of the evolution of the internet, and we will be speaking in details about this topic. It will definitely bring benefits. For example, in Web 3.0, powerful technology like artificial intelligence will have a special amplified role. AI will become an even bigger technology than it is today, and we are looking forward to follow these developments. Nevertheless, the skeptics have argued that Web 3.0 is just a buzzword and have discussed its drawbacks as well. As any new technology, Web 3.0 seems to be a double-edged sword, having great possibilities, yet can lead to a massive drawbacks if probably not properly understood. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome our three panelists, Ms. Tammy Young. She's a founder and CEO of the Numbers Protocol. Mr. Phil Chen is a founding partner at Raise Capital, and Ms. HQ Han, who is an ecosystem growth lead at the Protocol Labs, to explore these possibilities, challenges, and pitfalls of the Web 3.0. Now, before I let the panelists introduce themselves, I would like to ask each one of you one question. What is your understanding of the Web 3.0? Because a lot of people understand it differently, and how different it is from the Web 1, Web 2, and where are we going, and what would be its biggest opportunities and risks which will be unfolding in front of us in the years to come. So please do introduce yourself and tell your insights about these topics. Let's start with Tammy. Tammy.
Hello, thank you, Irakli, and nice to see everybody here. So I'm Tammy Young, founder of Numbers Protocol. Numbers is a Web3 photo network challenging the empty world by creating an open and verifiable ecosystem for digital media. To answer Irakli's question, what's my understanding of Web 3.0? I think, so the most amazing element of Web 3.0 for me is it is open, transparent, and also decentralized. So the current iteration of web is often characterized as a social web, and digital media are actually locked in the centralized server. And when they are uploaded, they actually belongs to the service which hosts those services. And although we probably have some privacy policies such as GDPR, but the fact is, before I really claim my data back, and those data are actually owned by the tech services. But I really believe that Web 3.0 has the opportunity to reforming the internet and creating a new value exchange and an entirely new economy based on the peer-to-peer decentralized system with trust, integrity, and transparency at the forefront. So that's my understanding.
Thank you, Tammy. And let's go now to the HQ Han. And HQ, please do introduce yourself and tell us your insights. How do you understand Web 3.0 and what will be its best features to it and the biggest risks as well.
Sure. All right. Yeah, my name is HQ Han. I'm the collaborations lead at Protocol Labs. So we are the team behind IPFS and Filecoin, amongst other projects. Very quickly, 1-minute version of IPFS is that it is a protocol for the decentralized web. It essentially makes the web work peer-to-peer. So think of it as an analogy to HTTP, which we use every day. That is a location-based protocol. What IPFS does is that it addresses every piece of content with what we call a content identifier. So rather than going to a specific location, it's like, just find me that content wherever it is on the web. Filecoin is the incentive layer on top of IPFS. So through cryptographic proofs, we are able to ensure that data is stored for as long as people wish to in a content addressable way, basically based on IPFS. We're currently the largest decentralized storage network with 15 exabytes of storage and default storage layer and infrastructure in several smart contract systems in the Web3 space. So now to the question of how do I think about Web3? How do I understand it? So this is a very interesting question because when we kind of like look at the term Web 3.0, it first surfaced in 2006 by Tim Berners-Lee, who created the World Wide Web. And he thought that Web 3 as an extension of Web 2 would be the semantic web, which basically is data on the web that's readable by AI and machines. So this is a description of the web, with data that has inherent meaning, and it focuses on how data is consumed. However, as you can see in sort of like the past 1-2 years, we kind of have like a new definition of Web3, kind of called like the decentralized web, and it focuses a lot on how data gets added, owned, and stored. So to me, I think the defining feature of Web 3.0 as we understand it today is around ownership, where in the sort of like Web 2 world, we have a lot of our data that's being controlled by centralized platforms such as like Facebook, as Tammy mentioned. A lot of images, media, etc. data is trapped in centralized platforms. Web 3 basically allows users and creators to own their own data and their own content that they create. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, HQ. And now I'll go directly to Phil before I sort of summarize my understanding of it. Phil, please do introduce yourself and tell us that why you are investing in all of this, and plus, what is your understanding of Web 3.0 and what will be its best features?
Yeah, my name is Phil Chen. I'm the founding partner of Raise Capital. Raise Capital, we invest in everything from crypto to kind of SaaS infrastructure, and we've done a few Web3 companies. And then previously, I built this phone called the HTC Exodus, which is still right now still the only phone out there that has a hardware wallet built in. Meaning there's a private key that empowers the users to own, which is, I think, the fundamental or foundational concept of what Web 3.0 is. I think the key to understanding Web 3.0 is just the understanding the concept of a digital asset or digital property. And just to zoom out of it, there has been, other types of properties defined in our history. Like, during the agricultural revolution, there was the definition of real estate property. And during the regulation around the idea of intellectual property. And the thing is, we're this far down, this thing we call the information age or the internet, and we're only beginning to start this conversation around digital property and digital assets.
I think we had a bit of a disruption with the connection of Phil. I don't see him here. Oh, Phil, you're back with us.
Yeah. And so I don't know where I left off, but yeah, I think, Bitcoin was the first, digital asset or digital property defined. People say Web 1 was just, read, like stuff like Netscape. Web 2 was read and write, and companies like Google, Amazon, Facebook. And Web 3 is read, write, and own, and owning digital, this thing called a digital asset or digital property. And the reason why, in Web 2, nobody owns their own digital property or digital data, or as Tammy and both HQ were talking about, data, is because, this data or digital property is only owned by a few companies, right? Which is why, guys like Yuval Harari, who's, very famous for his books, writing like books like Sapiens and Homo Deus, he would say like, why technology favors tyranny. And he's definitely taking from the Web 2 model is because, when a few companies own everybody's data, and then hence companies like Facebook, who, I don't know, there's maybe 3 billion users, which is bigger than any, China, India, US, Europe kind of combined in terms of population. When somebody has that much control and that much power, and basically control the information flow, they're more powerful than countries, which is why I think, Mark Zuckerberg is he's the new Caesar, so to speak, right? And Web 3.0 is trying to correct that problem, right? It's trying to say, everybody should have some minimal sovereignty, right? And that minimal sovereignty starts with a private key. Hopefully we can expand that to other forms of data, and so, yeah, Web3 is a reaction against Web2. And so, yeah, that's how I would, start the conversation about what Web3 is.
Thank you so much, Phil. And I think those insights are very important because we do hear different opinions. We hear all kinds of explanations. Web 1, which was a flat web, and then it became more interactive. And now it will be a web where we will all have some sort of a pieces of ownership, and it will liberate us, and hopefully it will bring a lot of good. So that's what we are hoping, and that's what we are interested in to achieve, rather than an opposite effect. Now, I would like to ask sort of one question to each panelist, and then later on we can move into the sort of discussion and debate. Let's go to Tammy. And Tammy, as Web 3.0 continuously grow and will grow, what are your opinions on its future impact? So, for example, or negative impacts. For example, there may be new types of crimes, scams, and other kind of things. So can you please share your opinion and how to deal with all of that?
Yeah, so I think this one is definitely a very important question. So I'm a believer of technology will evolve and then bring new problems. It will solve the old problems, but it will also create the new problems. So to me, I think one of the very big challenges today is, NFT was super hot in the Web 3.0 world in the last whole year. And a lot of people bought NFT and they thought NFT alone is going to solve the ownership problem, the copyright problem, and solving all the problems of digital media. But actually what really happened is in the Web 2 world, so people will right-click and save your photo, then share it on social media. And the same thing actually happened in Web 3.0, that people will right-click and then save your photo and then mint it as an NFT and then sell it in the marketplace. So for example, like recently there was a news about like 80% of the gasless items on the top NFT platforms are actually fake, and they actually admit that. So I think the reason why it is so challenging is because so there is no good source of information to help people to easily work out with which one is good or which one is bad, and how can we tell. So if you don't have these kind of information to tell which one is real, which one is not real, which one I can trust, or which one I cannot. So no matter is in Web 2 or in Web 3, the problem remains. It's just the same thing repeats, and then from social media to the NFT marketplace. But I think as long, because as everybody talk about Web3 is about open data. So since the nature of Web3 is open, transparent, and traceable, which means that now we have the opportunity to use new technology to create a traceable and verifiable digital media ecosystem. So that from there, I think so some of the challenges, such as the scan or the content theft, so this kind of problems may have, or a very big problem, the misinformation, the fake news. So these kind of problems may have potentially have a better solution in the Web3. So that's my opinion.
Thank you very much, Tammy. And I will come to you a little bit later on the fake news and the deepfakes and some of the issues you are personally working on. Now I'm going to go back to Phil for a second. And Phil, I read your recent article, op-ed, which you wrote about the Bitcoin is the key to the ethical AI. So over there, you're just mentioning that Bitcoin, through the model of true ownership, can bring a voice to the individuals that's as loud and clear as the biggest players in the room. That's a big statement. And how exactly would the use of Bitcoin and the ownership of the digital assets in general promise a voice to its users? And furthermore, so how does the ownership of digital assets relate to the Web3? And how will the ownership be realized in the Web3?
Yeah. So I would say what Bitcoin introduced is, many, like 4 or 5 main things that I think, which we believe the original promise of the internet. We believe that the internet should have been open, it should have been public, should have been permissionless and borderless, right? I think many of us, if not, most of the people that I know that got into technology and the internet, we were excited about, those features about the internet, right? I think the fact of the matter is the internet today is no longer the internet. It really is just a collection of intranets, right? Clearly, China has its own internet. The EU and the West has its own internet. Russia, of course, has its own internet. India has its own internet. And so really the internet as we know it is a collection of, individual sovereign bordered intranets, right? And the why and Bitcoin, Bitcoin fixes this, right? Like just one feature, like the borderlessness of Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin can cross geographical borders quite easily. Because it has that decentralized borderless feature built into the protocol, right? And I think those features that are borderless, I think each of these features, borderless, permissionless, decentralized, I mean, these are all talks, of its own that we can get into, like how is it borderless? How is it permissionless? How is the internet, or how is Web 2.0 companies not permissionless and not borderless, right? And so, yeah, I think that Bitcoin is the first to introduce that, and of course, Ethereum and now other Web 3.0 public blockchain companies, and there are a few of them that are experimenting on how to build these, decentralized, open, public, permissionless, borderless kind of public systems. But yeah, I would just, I think the way I would summarize this whole conversation, instead of kind of stating what I think about this, but I think there was this conversation between Reid Hoffman and Peter Thiel, and just to frame the conversation, he said that Reid Hoffman would say crypto is anarchy and AI is rule of law. And Peter Thiel took the opposite view and said crypto is libertarian and AI is communist, right? I think that summarizes that gets to the crux of this conversation. And of course, you could debate on both sides. So I'll leave it at that, and we can get into whichever thread of conversation you want to get from there.
Thank you so much, Phil. And these insights are extremely important. Of course, we will get to some of the details here as well. And I have another question for you a little bit later, while I go to HQ Han and ask her, so how do you project what's going to happen with the Web 3.0 in 5, 10, 15 years time? Are we all going to be indulged there living, or there will be some sort of a parallel world, or this is two kind of optimistic projections?
Yeah, sure. I have several thoughts about it. I'm actually not very sure exactly about, which timeline we are going to evolve. Like, I don't know if it's going to be 5 years from now or 10 years from now, but yeah, happy to share my thoughts. So with sort of like the understanding that we established about Web3, I think a lot of people in the industry are trying to push as to where is the extent that we can go with it and what's the next evolution. So I'm sure that maybe a lot of you have heard about the term like Metaverse, and it could be possible that this sort of like experience is the next evolution of Web3. I think Phil mentioned like the sort of spark that Bitcoin created in like creating and seeding the idea of like borderlessness and how like we are moving beyond an individual sovereign border internet. So at Protocol Labs, we kind of understand and define the metaverse as like virtual spaces that enable humans to experience the web in a new way, and especially with a sense of presence. And what this really entails is like, you can imagine, like borderless interconnected virtual worlds with fully functioning economies. So I personally and several of my colleagues are really kind of like interested, I think, because it is a combination of like a lot of different kinds of like emerging technologies. There are like several components and horizontal primitives that need to come together for a metaverse to be like fully functional and not just like some kind of like empty world. I think that's a common criticism that we are seeing out of like the sort of like new metaverse experiences that are coming out today. And actually, there is also another thought around like, how do we actually spend our time right now? And if you kind of like look at it as like real world versus digital world, I think Irakli, you had this kind of question, like, are we, like going to have a parallel world or something like that? And I think the way that I see it is that you just have this like experience. Right now there is a real world and a digital world. And in the future, I kind of think that like the proportion of the digital world is just going to get larger. And it's kind of inevitable as, we see through the decades that we are getting more interconnected through the web and etc. Yeah.
No, thanks a lot. And I fully agree with you about the virtual world becoming bigger. And this is completely inevitable for those who would like to understand it, is that the physical world has real physical boundaries while virtual world doesn't. So in principle, we could build endless virtual worlds where there could be endless possibilities, although somebody would argue that it would also have endless problems for us as well. So this is something that we need to actually sort of bear in mind and understand it properly, probably regulate it as well, and see how this is going to be used for entire world for our own benefits as well. Now I'm going to jump to Tammy. Tammy, I am familiar with the numbers protocol. I've seen some of the applications you are developing, which is really amazing and very encouraging, especially in the space of sort of combating misinformation and ensuring the authenticity of the digital assets. Maybe you can tell us a little more about how you have a personal quest to fight deep fakes and misinformation in a world which is full of misinformation. And how are you going to, how you and type of applications you are developing and others will probably develop around the ecosystem will support that type of movements?
Yeah, so sure, love to share. I think the key with the Web3 technology, as HQ, Irakli, and also Phil all talk about, Web3 or say internet is supposed to be borderless. So I think, for example, like a lot of problems with the misinformation, fake news, one of the root cause is so the current internet was designed in the way that it's not very easy to track the authenticity of the information, or say it's very challenging to track the original source of the information. But in the Web3, so because the technology evolves, so it can be slightly different. So for example, something I believe HQ must be very familiar with, like, so in the Web2 world, when you see a photo on the internet, and then when you download it, and you probably will notice that it is some kind of name like image.png. So the name of the file itself is given. So for example, like the same image can have different names on different servers. But in the Web3 world, what happened is, so every file will have its very unique ID. So for example, like in the IPFS decentralized web, every file has its unique ID. So this actually opens a big possibility for us to build a system where you will be able to attach the true history of that file to the photo, to the video that you want to trace. So that means by doing so, it is possible that when the photo, the video is shared across the internet, and you can still, so every time you get it, you can get exactly the same identity of that file. And then you can use that identity just as the identity of human, and then you can trace the history of that. So that sort of gives you the possibility of verifying the source of the digital media. So I think this is actually how we see this. I mean, there are, of course, a lot of reasons behind the problems of misinformation and fake news. But what we see it is one of the real root cause is it's just too difficult to verify the authenticity or the original source of that. So what we are trying to do is to leverage the Web3 technology and make the digital media traceable and verifiable. And of course, that will probably also have new problems in the future. For example, like when every file's history is open and transparent on the internet, you can imagine that so there must be new privacy problems comes out. But I think that's just like from Web 2, now we are evolving into Web 3. So the technology will evolve and there will be new solutions, and we should be able to find the balance between the privacy and the transparency in the future.
Yes, I'm very excited about all of this as well, and would be following your work, and would be happy to involve some of the other deliberations and solutions which we at our UN Center are developing, and the other colleagues will also dwell on this opportunity. Now I'm going to go again to Phil. And Phil, can you please elaborate a little more about artificial intelligence? Because you did mention a debate between Hoffman and Peter Thiel about sort of whether the AI will be a rule of law or something more restrictive than that. So what do you think personally? How should we ensure that artificial intelligence, being a very powerful technology, will serve as a positive sort of a amplifier of all of this rather than a restrictive mechanism?
Yeah, I think the defining feature, because when I was at Horizons Ventures, when we invested in DeepMind, I remember learning about all the deep learning algorithms. And, I think any AI company today, any good kind of deep learning company will say that, it's not really the algorithms that differentiate these companies. It really is the data, right? The data set used to train these deep learning algorithms. And so at the end of the day, it's whoever owns that data, they will be able to, predict, whichever behavior. And so if Amazon, for example, owns all the, your shopping data, right, then they're able to, of course, sell ads, but also predict what you might want, right? And so companies like Facebook, they know everything what you're reading, right? Google, they know everything you're searching, right? The credit card companies know everything what you're buying. And so, if you start thinking about everything in our lives, it's basically, pieces of data, right? And then these artificial intelligence companies or big data companies, they are able to control and learn everything about you, right? They can hence monetize anything, right? And then so the issue is, when only a few companies know everything about you, they're able to, gain, centralized, control over, everything that you do, right? Which is why, and Reid Hoffman's position is, hey, that's okay, because now we have surveillance of every single person on what they do. And now we can create a very safe world, right? We have rule of law to protect us, right? Whereas I think Peter Thiel and this whole kind of Web3 decentralization community is saying, no, I think, or the Web3, perspective is no, I think these centralized, big pots of data shouldn't be owned by a few parties, right? It should be much more spread out, and it should be much more decentralized. All my health data and all my financial data, all my social graph, all my behavior, my commerce data shouldn't, it should be separate, right? And it shouldn't be owned by a few companies that, basically, then it's owned by, these AI algorithms that are able to predict, manipulate, control what you see and throw ads at you. And so, yeah, I think, that's that. When we talk about Web3, and HQ was talking about the metaverse, it really is, a whole kind of mixed conversation around data ownership, around artificial intelligence, with deep learning, and what the metaverse is, and how much time we're spending on digital. And my favorite definition of what the metaverse is, and I would say, Web3 as well, is, I wouldn't, I much rather think of metaverse not as a virtual space or, some place, or, an internet plus presence or immersion. I think the most helpful definition is to think of the metaverse or the Web3 as, a point in time. Much like when we talk about AI, there's that the point of singularity where robots and algorithms are more intelligent or more conscious, than human beings. I think the metaverse and the Web3 movement is actually a point in time where human beings value digital assets over physical assets. And I'll repeat that, whenever humans value digital assets over physical assets. And I think you can expand that into anything digital. It's not, although we're defining as digital assets or digital property, you can extend that to, digital or virtual relationships, virtual communities. And so it's everything virtual or digital, right? The more time and energy and value that we as people put into this. And so, yeah, I think and of course, the future is unevenly distributed. There are countries where people already spend more time in the virtual worlds than the physical worlds. And people do, and there are people who value digital property over physical property already. And so, yeah, I think that sets the framework. I think you can see that, this bleeds into this conversation over Web3 bleeds into artificial intelligence and the metaverse.
Thank you very much. And it was very insightful, especially the definition of that point of time where people start valuing digital assets over the physical assets, and probably larger number of people would start doing that. That's when we will be entering probably that metaverse or that Web 3.0, what we are talking about, although we are already seeing very interesting glimpse of all of this. HQ, would you like to comment on the AI part and the metaverse before I ask one final question to all of you to reflect on?
I think Phil covered like a lot of the points, right? I think like personally myself, I also looked a lot into AI, and I think it is a, like what Phil said, like your value capture is if you own the data. And I think just to add on a point is that in the future, if like supposing using like Web3 as a foundation to own and share data, not only that, but also the algorithms themselves can also be worked on by like many people and open sourced. And not necessarily if you have the same access to data, another person and a community of like hundreds of people cannot come up with better algorithms than like, for example, a closed platform right now. So that's also another kind of like interesting point around AI. I think metaverse, not too much to add, but I guess what we're also saying and trying to like point out is that there are definitely risks and implications to kind of like the sort of like trend towards like digital. And I think, like a certain debate that's going on is that like, how can we kind of like make this metaverse or like our future like more open? Because we do know that it's going to be very pervasive and powerful. And if we kind of like try to construct that world or like our world in the future in the same way that we did it with the Web2 foundations, then we are probably going to have, like equally the same kind of problems. And so like, I think it's really interesting that we're starting to have the debate today, for example, with you, with the panel, that we can sort of like push at the discussion across like all the different layers and stacks that comprise of like Web 3.0 and the metaverse. Yeah.
Thank you so much, HQ. And before we wrap up the webinar, I would like to ask one question to all of you to reflect succinctly. Throughout our work, we've been observing how governments are adopting their digital strategies, and some of them call it artificial intelligence strategies, or some of them simply call it digital strategies. Those are the governmentally approved documents, how and which direction governments would like to invest in the technology. And what is really important to take into account is that only 60 or so countries have those digital strategies, while large number of countries don't have that. And this is one of those signs, one of these possible signs of the growing digital gap, which we've been experiencing for a while. And this may actually even amplify that. So what I would like to ask is that how equal, how inclusive will be the access to the Web 3.0, and how to ensure that the benefits, fruits of it are actually enjoyed by larger populations, everybody, every human being in the world, and it will not be sort of triggering yet another amplifier to the growing digital divide. How to ensure that we will have many people enjoy all of this? Please do reflect, all of you. Let's go first to Tammy, and then followed by Phil and HQ.
Yes, so I think my response to this question is, I think the nature of internet is to be borders and to be shared across the mankind. So I think Web3 already proved that it is happening, and it is so for example, like crypto is a good example that many people, although there is no regulation for crypto, but there are already a lot of people adopting it and then using it in different countries, no matter the government has a regulation for that yet or not. So I think that's the same for Web3. So I think, so Web3, just to echoing what HQ and Phil mentioned, I think it's just one step further and bringing us from the physical world and more to the digital world. And then in that digital world, everything you experience there, you will value them more than what you have in the Web2 world. So in that case, I think that is actually something very nature. So I mean, I actually thought that so it will be the government to follow what happened in the Web3 world and then defining the regulation based on what really happening there, instead of like having a regulation first and then and then people follow. Of course, that will lead to a lot of problems or the potential future crime Irakli just mentioned. But also, as I mentioned in the previous conversation, I think that Web3 is just evolve. We are just experiencing involvement of the internet. So it's going to be more open, it's going to be more transparent, and some of the issues, which is very challenging in Web2 world, such as misinformation and fake news, we might have the potential solution in Web3. And of course, there will be new problems, and then we will need the government or everybody together to find out a better solution for that. But I think it's still a world which I personally really looking forward to it.
Thank you, Tammy, very much. And I will go for quick reflections from Phil and HQ.
Yeah, I think that, probably everybody kind of followed what Elon Musk and Jack Dorsey when they were attacking the ideas of Web3. And there was this kind of Twitter battle between some of the VCs and Elon Musk. And, my understanding of, why, Jack Dorsey or Elon Musk is, quote, anti-Web3 is because, most of the Web3 companies are still centralized and hence bordered and permissioned, all the opposite things that, Bitcoin stood for, right? And so, I don't think they're definitely not, like Jack Dorsey is definitely not anti, Web3 in the sense that, all those features we just talked about, right? The permissionless, borderlessness part. He's definitely pro that because, Jack Dorsey is, and Block, his company is definitely pro Bitcoin and, wants to build everything on top of Bitcoin. They have great organizations that give grants to Bitcoin developers, for example. And so I would just say that, to really ensure that, this digital divide doesn't happen or to give more access and to really stand on those principles is to really be able to separate the signal from the noise, is to really identify which are the actual projects that are, public blockchains, right? And there are really not that many, Bitcoin, Ethereum, there's a few others. And the problem is, a lot of Web3 companies and a lot of NFT projects and, back then, a lot of ICO projects, there are a majority amount of scams, right? And centralized scams, right? And so in some sense, it's even worse than Web2 companies. And so, yeah, I would just say, we all need to be we all need to work hard and be educated to be able to separate the signal from the noise and to identify and support and spend our time and value on the public blockchains, and there really are far and few. So yeah, I'll stop there, and I think that's it takes a lot of time and energy and education to do that.
Thank you very much, Phil, and thanks for all what you are doing. And HQ, your final thoughts on the equality and how to ensure that a lot of people will receive the benefits of Web3 and the related technologies, which will be around all of that, including inside the metaverse.
Yeah, so I think to sort of like maybe contextualize this, like the whole discussion so far, and Irakli's question about like countries and digital strategies. So the way that I understand it is like, there are of course 60 over countries with so-called digital strategies, and I also looked quite a lot in that kind of like a few years ago. And so these like digital strategies, they kind of like, a country has like an AI strategy, a country has like, a strategy to move maybe their financial sector of like paper into like cashless, for example, and COVID accelerated a lot of this like digital movement. And from like a sort of like government point of view, when they're thinking about the future, I think they kind of like recognize this digital trend, and part of the strategy is like the need to get ahead of it. So you have like the UK, Middle East, Canada, for example, really big in AI. Singapore and Hong Kong, I think, have also kind of like defined their so-called like digital strategies. And what, like the sort of like in parallel, they usually have like a crypto strategy. So for example, like Singapore and Hong Kong, you do see like the central banks coming up with like regulations that flow down to what, like exchanges can do, what kind of products can be sold to retail. And currently, I think that is like the sort of like state of affairs right now that we can see with like digital strategies and crypto strategies, where like Web3 and why it's like super important for I think regulators and governments to really understand, because it comes in as like a foundational layer. So as Phil kind of like talked about it, like it's possible to construct AI models in a Web3 way, such that it's more open on the data level as well as the algorithm level. So it basically is another way to construct perhaps like a digital strategy that you can sort of bring in confluence things like crypto, AI, and Metaverse, and what the future of work looks like. So that's some of my thoughts. I think on the sort of like socio-economic front that you mentioned, there is definitely going to be some change in like the workforce and like skills that like can kind of like be able to be in demand, I would say. And I think these are like usual cycles that countries and economies go through. And like with everything getting digital, of course, there's a sort of like displacement of the workforce if they're not trained in coding, for example, and they, they're doing more like manual labor, for example. These are like real problems that like will start to surface and have started to surface, and people have been calling it out for years. What I think is like my final thought and like the really kind of like interesting thing about Web3 is that, with the sort of like borderlessness and the openness to everybody to like participate in the economy, we've sort of like seen that with DeFi, we sort of seen that with play to earn. Basically, I think it also lowers the barriers for you to start earning an income. And capture value from like the economy itself through like the token model. So while it made this displace some workforce stuff, it also like creates new opportunities for people and lowers the barriers for them to, sort of like earn a living. And we're seeing that quite a lot in the developing countries right now. So that's what's really exciting for me.
Thank you. Thank you so much, HQ. Thank you so much, Tammy. Thank you, Phil, for all your work, for all the education, all the projects you are undertaking and building for the prosperity of everyone. And from our side, we would be very excited to involve you in other discussions, other practical applications and debates which we'll be organizing. And we would like to see the world being prospered with the technology. We would like to see at that point when people are actually appreciating digital assets and understanding to it, and which will bring the true prosperity to all of us, including the fulfillment of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And with this, we'd like to wrap up the project. We'd like to see more connectivity in the world as well. And some of our partner organizations like ITU and UNICEF are running a very interesting project, Giga project, where they're bringing connectivity to all the schools. And with this, on this positive note, I would like to end this session of the Future series, and we will see you next time. Hopefully next time when we see each other, we will have a safer and more peaceful world as we have it now. We wish you all a wonderful day, and thank you so much for listening.